On our last episode, the team did an amazing job recreating Wonder Woman's shield. But come on, she's the most dominant female heroine in comic book history, so you know, we had to make the sword too.
I'm Matt.
I'm Kerry.
We are the Stagmer brothers of Baltimore Knife and Sword. We're going to be building some of your favorite weapons, and some weapons that you've never seen before.
This is Man-at-Arms, Reforged.
I've been pulling for a Wonder Woman build for a long time, well before we saw her in any movies, and I think we can all agree she was by far the best thing in Batman vs. Superman. So in this episode, we're gonna make her sword the God Killer.
We know Wonder Woman has a lot of different iconic weapons. She has the shield, the bracers, the lasso. But in the most recent trailer for the new movie, they really focused in a lot on the sword. Ilya, why don't you tell them how you're gonna make it?
For the blade, I'm going to use a multi-bar construction. This is a piece of 1045. This is going to form the core of the sword. For the edge, I'm going to take this piece off, pattern welded steel. This is 1095 and 15 and 20. I'm going to fold it a couple times to increase the layer count, stretch it out into a long rod, and wrap it around this. That way the outer layer is Damascus, and the core is straight steel.
And not only is the blade gonna be awesome, but Ferenc is gonna carve a beautiful guard. He's gonna do the iconic dragons on the end, and then we're gonna do some really cool stuff on the handle as well. By the time we're all said and done, this is gonna be a beautiful sword.
The first step we're gonna do on this sword is to form the inside core. We're gonna start from a large slice off a piece of 1045 round stock. So Ilya's just gonna draw that out using a couple heats underneath the power hammer, and then he'll move on to the outside wrap.
We're beginning to do the modeling and sculpt for the guard and the pommel on the Wonder Woman sword. We're using a polymer clay. It's a little stiff and it takes a while to get it malleable to start to work. We'll roll these out flat, then cut our dimensions, begin our detailing. Kerry's plasma cut a template for us of the blade. Then once Ilya is finished forging the actual sword, we'll go ahead and take these pieces, move them over to the actual blade, and then we'll finish up our shaping, do our detailing, and get it ready for casting. As you can see, if I start to bend this, you'll start to see some of these breaks coming out. We want to make sure that all of this stuff is really homogeneous. There's a good word for that. Getting closer on the proportions of our sculpt. We're working on a piece of granite. It's starting to get warm today. The weather's really nice, and the polymer clay that we use tends to get a little bit loose if it gets a little bit warm. So the piece of granite is keeping it cooled down so it stays a little bit stiffer and easier to work. This is also why I'm using some of the sculpting tools that I'm using as opposed to molding it by hand, because my hands will warm it back up. It will get very loose and difficult to work in fine areas.
The Damascus billet is already welded. I started out with a 25-layer stack. The first fold gave me 50 layers. The second fold gave me 100 layers, and the last third fold produced the 200-layer bar. At the desired 200 layers, the bar is now ready to become the wrap for the sword. This will become the cutting edge.
So Ilya's done a great job forging both our parts for our sword blade. Now you can see he's taking great care in making sure the thicknesses of both these pieces are spot on. That'll really help him in the forge weld. But from here, I'm just gonna go to the grinder, I'm gonna true up our core a little bit, but then just make sure that all the scale is off the surface of both our pieces. So when he goes to forge weld them, everything connects just right.
Matt cleaned off the welding areas of the two billets. This is 1045 solid mono steel, and this is our Damascus wrap. It is approximately 210% the length of this. The 10% accounts for the wrap. Boom, 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 boom. Right? The next step is to tack weld the pieces on one side. That way the pieces don't move around. The next step after the tack welding is complete is go back into the forge and use an oxypropane torch to heat up this area and bend the wrap over the tip. Now, forge welding works when two pieces of metal are heated up to the same temperature very high, so the molecules of iron are moving with the same speed within the piece. And as soon as they're brought together and the pieces are clean, the molecules do this, whoop, and then the piece is one solid billet.
Now, while Rick is working on some modeling for another episode, we've begun to detail some of the parts of the guard for the Wonder Woman's sword. I'm using a piece of bone that I've shaped so that I can get the same kind of divots that have that little point to represent the suggested dragon scales along the back of the dragons. We're not going to do these too deep because we don't want to help create air bubbles in the investment for the casting, but this will get us through this stage. Then we'll move on to the wax, and we'll begin to detail that even more as we go further through the process.
Now that all of our pieces are prepped, Ilya is going to heat up the entire piece to forge welding temperature, move to the anvil, and set the welds by hand. He then is going to move to a swage block on the ground and make sure the point is forge welded first. Now that all the pieces are forge welded solid as one, it's time to begin drawing out the blade. Ilya is going to move to the Nazel power hammer onto the flat dies and draw the blade out. He'll then flip it around, establish the shoulder area, and draw out the tang.
At this point, the basic preform for the blade is done. The preform is narrower than my template, and that is on purpose. Hand beveling, which sets up the cross-section geometry of the blade itself, makes it wider. One can expect the blade to be about 1/4 inch wider on either side, as a result 1/2 inch on a double-edged blade, and about 10% longer than the preform.
Here we have it. The blade of the God Killer has now been forged. It's now my duty to do the grinding. I'm gonna start off by doing perimeter, which means I'm gonna clean up all those little hammer strikes Ilya did. Make sure we have nice, clean, smooth edges for cutting. And I'm then gonna move on to grinding the bevels. You'll see me true up some things like the point and the shoulder as I go. After the blade is completely clean and the surfaces are all true, I'm gonna have to strike in 2 parallel fullers that run the full length of the blade all the way up, and they meet together here at the point. It's gonna be kind of tricky to meet them together at the point like that, but I'll get it done.
So we're moving on to the pommel for the God Killer sword for Wonder Woman. We're not using wire as a armature within this. I just have it on a stand. The weather's changing a whole lot, so this stuff tends to either be very stiff or it gets very loose. We're working some very thin areas. What we're going to do is we're going to rough this out, and then we're going to take this to the mold and the wax where we have a rigid casting, and then we can really refine some of the details. It's going to be quite heavy. This is a very large sword. This will be cast in metal, and this is really going to help the balance of the weapon.
If you look at the sword from the movie, you can tell these fullers have been milled in on a milling machine, but I'm going to do these by hand. So my lines might wander a little bit, but I'll be able to go back later and true everything up.
Ferenc has brought over the molds for me that he's carved out of the Sculpey, and I'm going to actually make physical molds of them. We have a hardener and the resin, and what we have to do is measure equal parts of both, so I'm going to use the balance scale for that. Going to mix it together. I have about a 15-minute work time, and then we pour it in and we let it set for 24 hours. And then we'll cut it open, pour waxes in it, and make the final piece. And if you notice, the first one we did, all the air bubbles have come to the surface, and keep doing that. That's why it takes so long to set up. It just slowly, all the air just sort of rises around the piece.
Ilya's gonna take his time, make sure he has a good, even heat on the whole length of the blade, and then go to oil. You'll notice the first step that he's done is place it in tang first, because that's the thickest portion of the blade. You get a good preheat on that, and you can flip it over to the thin side, get your heat, and go to the quench. The risk on heat treating this blade is slightly amplified. If a blade sabers or warps a little in heat treat, we can usually grind it to fix it, but we've already ground in our fullers, so we have to make sure this one stays straight.
Polymer molds have set for 24 hours now, and now we're ready to open them up. This main piece is a one-piece mold, which just means I have to pull the back off and get the piece out, and then we'll pour wax into it, and it'll just sit and dry, and then we'll cut it and work with the wax. And this one, we have to cut in half, open it up, pull the piece that was made out of it, and then pour wax into it. And then we carve and detail both, and we'll cast them into bronze.
For larger waxes, instead of using an injector, we just heat up some wax in a small pan and pour directly into the molds.
Now that the blade has been heat treated, it's time to move on to the final shaping. I'm gonna start on an 80 grit to get my edges trued in, then I'm gonna move on to a 120, 220, and our final polish. After that, it will be fully prepped to then establish our runes, and then we'll etch the blade. Now, not only will etching bring out our beautiful pattern, but that's also gonna be how the runes are placed all the way up the middle of the sword. So it'll be pretty unique. This blade's gonna be beautiful.
Now that the pommel has been sculpted, molded, wax is shot, they're now sprued up. It's ready to pour the investment in, set them in the kiln to bake. We're almost ready to pour these. We only have a short amount of time left, so this has to be right. They have to be spot on. So Kerry's gonna make sure they bake through the night. We'll be ready to pour in the morning.
Using a small knife wheel, Ilya goes in and cuts the spiral for this handle. He's also going to have to create a punch that's going to lay the scales in afterwards.
We've only had enough time to work one wax of the guard into shape. The casting has to turn out right. With the flask now up to temperature and our bronze liquid and molten, it's time to cast. Kerry's now going to remove the crucible from the furnace and go straight to pour it into our flask. Once it's cooled, we can quench it and see if everything turned out. Now that the metal has cooled down and is safe to quench, Lauren's going to quench it in some water, removing all the excess material and revealing that indeed our guard did cast solid.
Perfect.
This is quite a relief. If this didn't turn out, we would have had to pull an all-nighter to make another one again.
One of the major challenges that we're faced with in doing the hieroglyphic runes on the Wonder Woman sword is identifying the characters, what is actually on here, what these hieroglyphs are. So we're taking some of the ones that are legible that we can see and begin to match up the different characters for the ones that we can't make out. And then we're going to paint these on here. The guys are going to etch this blade, and Wonder Woman will have her God Killer sword.
With all the parts cleaned up and the blade now finished and etched, it's time to get our first look at what this sword's gonna look like. Rick's gonna do a rough assembly, we'll move on, do all the final finishing, and then we'll be ready for beauties. I think this build really highlighted a lot of different talents of many of our craftsmen. The forging, the carving, the casting, and the detail work were all stellar. Can't wait to see how well this thing performs. This sword is wonderful.
Click here to subscribe, or click here to watch more episodes. Thanks for watching Man-at-Arms Reforged. We need to know what you want the guys to build, so tell us in the comments below what weapons you want to see next.